This is my first story slam. It's kind of terrifying, not gonna lie. Kind of feel like Crosby, Stills and Nash, their second performance was actually Woodstock, which is kind of terrifying. So this is more of a story about my father than it is about me, actually. My father was, he was the seventh of 8 children, actually. And he grew up in a house that was probably built for 3 people, but it was occupied by 10 people. He was an All-American basketball player, one of the best basketball players in the history of New York high school sports. And due to his basketball prowess and intellect, he got a full ride to NYU. Once he got there, he was doing really great and whatnot. I'm just going to fast forward a bit. Fast forward to, he's about my age, which is 28 for anyone who's wondering. Black don't crack. Yeah, 28. And he has a 9-year-old son, a 5-year-old daughter, and he is severely addicted to crack cocaine. He spirals into this addiction due to the fact that his the mother of his second child is cheating on him with one of his best friends from high school that he played basketball with. He spirals into this addiction, and this addiction follows him through adulthood. Once he's like 27, he's working like at a coal mine, doesn't really know what to do with his life. He's not really working at a coal mine, that's just kind of sleeping. He's 27 and he's just like, he's down. I'm sorry, he's 28, he's down. Along comes my mother. If there's ever a story slam about angels, I'll probably talk about that. She pulls him out of these 7 layers of hell, and she basically just builds him back up from the bootstraps up. But unfortunately, fast forward some years later, he ends up relapsing again. So now we're in the 80s. Me and my sister are born. And all of a sudden, my dad is clean for the first time in 15 years. He's clean for the first time in 15 years. This is very clearly an emotional story for me, so
Got it, bro.
I'm going to take my time. That's all right with y'all. So, even though my mom had taken him out of his addiction, he begins to relapse from time to time. Sorry, I'm a little lost. Sorry, I gotta break out some notes. That's alright? Break out some notes real quick.
Do it.
Yeah. First time. Wow, that's really long. Alright. I'm just gonna skip ahead. Alright, so let's fast forward. So we're living in LA at the time, and the majority of my dad's clients, he's an accountant at this time, and yeah, the majority of his clients live in New York, which is ridiculous because it makes him, he's up to like 90% travel, basically. So to counteract the lack of time that he got to spend with me during the week, on the weekends my father would take me to what seemed like excessively far away barbershops to get my hair cut. When we lived in Los Angeles, he would drive me 45 minutes away to Pasadena, And when we moved to New Jersey, after he got offered a job to work as a partner at a major accounting firm inside the World Trade Center, which is another story altogether. Spoiler, he survives. And although he no longer had to travel as much, he would drive me 45 minutes away to New York just to get my hair cut, which is kind of ridiculous because if you haven't noticed, this isn't exactly the fucking Sistine Chapel. I realized as I got older that these trips were for the sole purpose of giving me life advice and teaching me how to become the man that he would envision me to be. But anyway, the older I became, the more I appreciated and needed to hear what he had to say. For whatever reason, I still had one burning question in the back of my mind, and that was, what was the last straw that made my father finally decide to quit for good? Years later, my father finally invited me to one of his Narcotics Anonymous meetings for what would be the 20th anniversary of his clean date. To deviate again for a moment, when my father speaks, people listen. My father speaks in an extremely deep and authoritative tone, normally reserved for the likes of Mufasa and Darth Vader. So as soon as my father stood up to speak, the room fell completely silent. My father, as if he had known all along about my curiosity regarding the day, he decided to beat, regarding the day, decided to beat his addiction for good, ended up telling me the story of that day, and telling me the rest of the room the story of that day. The story goes as follows. My mother was pregnant with my sister Brittany. Brittany, possibly as a result of my father's drug abuse, was going to be born prematurely and would require an emergency C-section and was not given favorable odds to survive. Upon hearing this news, my father prayed for the first time in a long time and tried to make a deal with God, promising that if my sister survived and was born healthy, he would never touch a drug again. My sister did survive, and although she was born prematurely, she grew up to be so strong that she ended up throwing shot put and discus at the University of Syracuse. My father kept that promise, and the anniversary of his clean date is actually 3 days after my sister's birthday. She turned 31 in October. When my father finished telling the story, he began to cry, and the room stayed silent until my mother, my sister, and I walked up and hugged him. We hooked our arms around him, that all-American basketball player who had come from virtually nothing, who hadn't received basic human rights until he was 18, who had gone from an addict to a respected businessman, 9/11 survivor, and adored father. And it was then that I realized at this Narcotics Anonymous meeting, I realized that I was hooked and addicted to his words of advice. Thank you.